Welcome back to the Drive Home Reviews podcast, where we talk about the movies I have just seen as I'm driving home from the theater. And I am very excited to finally be able to bring you a review of Queen of the Ring. This is a movie that the minute I heard about it, I was like, I have got to see this. This is a movie it is just made for me, and I'll explain why here in a little bit. And of course, its release date came, and no theater within driving distance of me had it anywhere. And I consider driving distance at least almost an hour and a half, 2 hours sometimes from where I live at the moment. So it was nowhere to be found. And then it took forever in this day and age where movies are literally still in the theater, but you can already get them on some streaming platform. Of course, that didn't happen either, and you're just like, where the fuck is this movie? Finally, it shows up, and I jumped on it. I must say I was a little concerned because I've had it happen in the past where I've really been excited to see a film, and for some reason or another it gets held up and you can't get to it, and then when you finally see it, it's just kind of mediocre. So I was very concerned that this was going to be one of those instances. The longer it took, the more concerned I grew that, is this actually going to be worth the wait? So just jumping right in to answer that question before we get into more detail, yes, it was worth the wait. I am very happy I finally saw this movie. So the reason I have been so excited for this movie is a number of reasons, but the main one is longtime listeners or fans, or whatever I would call the people who do frequent my channels and podcasts, will know I am a lifelong wrestling fan. I believe I'm old enough now, I can say that I have loved pro wrestling for the majority of my life. And it's kind of weird because trying to make movies about pro wrestling or the lives of pro wrestlers has always been this very difficult task to achieve, which you wouldn't think it would be due to, how closely their lives resemble the best sports biopics and the best, Hollywood biopics. It's like this wonderful amalgamation of all of this. And just how much drama there is in the wrestling business. Those who don't follow it don't know some of the shit that has gone on behind the scenes and some of the lives some of these wrestlers led is beyond crazy and beyond amazing and tragic and all of this. But trying to create Hollywood narratives out of these things has been exceedingly difficult for a number of reasons. For a long time, that reason was the desire to not break kayfabe. For those not in the know, kayfabe is the wrestling slang for the storyline, because they kind of bridged that gap and had you for a long time in their history had this, is this real, is this not kind of thing. Kayfabe is if two people are pretending to hate each other, they have to hate each other outside of the show. Imagine that. Imagine being in a Broadway play. All right? Imagine being in Antigone, and you and the actor playing Creon have to actually hate each other outside of the theater in order to maintain the illusion. You'd think that was crazy, but that's what they had to do, and kayfabe was so heavily guarded for such a long time that you couldn't portray the sport and what happens in the ring as anything more than absolutely legitimate. legit. That's how you get things like the 80s wonderful, golden classic No Holds Barred. The other reason is because so much of wrestling history is literally owned by one entity, and that is World Wrestling Entertainment. That they are very careful about the narrative that they put out, and you can see this. They do a lot of documentaries now, I'll say quote-unquote documentaries, on Peacock and things. My parents were actually asking me, have you watched this one about the history of WrestleMania? It's like, no, I haven't. And even though I'm interested, the problem is that WWE controls their narrative. In other words, anything underhanded, anything less than sparkling and glowing, they don't acknowledge. It doesn't happen. And this can sometimes crowd potential narratives. For instance, the excellent film Fighting with My Family with Florence Pugh a few years back is a really good movie. But it is very clear it has had to pass through the WWE system and paint them as just the greatest wonderland of sweetness and light that ever did exist. You know? So you're getting a very distorted view of reality. Lately, however, we are starting to get real stories and real films and shows that are diving into what really goes on and what it's really like for these people. You know, for these athletes, these storytellers, these performers. Of course, it started with The Wrestler, with Mickey Rourke back in the early 2000s. We've got, 2 years ago, I believe it was, we got The Iron Claw with Zac Efron, excellent film. We've got the documentary series Dark Side of the Ring, which is a little bit more, I say a little bit more even-handed and isn't as much under the WWE thumb. You do kind of get it sometimes. You also have, not many people know about this one, and if you're a wrestling fan and you've never watched Heels, which is a Starz original show, which we are going to come back to because it's very interesting that it connects back to this movie in kind of a 6 degrees of separation kind of way. But that's an excellent show about the lives of independent wrestlers and that kind of struggle, and you know, it's great stuff. And it's not, I feel like it's giving more respect to the people who actually have to do it. You know, instead of glossing it over, it's actually showing this is the hardships that you go through to do this, and then to be told that what you do is fake. You know, you gotta sympathize. So anyway, that's a lot of rambling before I actually get to the point. So this film now comes to us and hits on a life story that I have to admit, even as a wrestling fan, I was somewhat ignorant of, and that is the life of Mildred Burke, one of the first big names in women's pro wrestling, or ladies pro wrestling, which you want to talk about an underdog story. Ladies wrestling has had, you know, if wrestling period has struggled for legitimacy, women's wrestling has been like, I can't even, let me give you just this again for the non-wrestling fans in the audience. This movie is all about how these women fought and, you know, literally fought and scrapped and dug their heels in and, you know, had to like struggle for legitimacy. And a scant 15 years ago, WWE was doing bra and panties matches. That was the extent of women's wrestling for a very long time. And only now, within the last, I'd say, 5 years or so, has it really been pushing, and these athletes are finally getting some of the credit that they deserve. So to kind of go back and to look at one of the very, not just one of, but a lot of the very first. So while this is a Mildred Burke's story, it is also a story of a lot of the first women wrestlers. Wrestling historians and wrestling fans are going to recognize names like Elvira Snodgrass, like Mae Young. You know, you're gonna recognize Clara Mortensen. You know, these are names that you hear in wrestling history. I think that's something I really loved about this movie, is that this is not just her life story. Which, again, talk about an underdog story. A person who had... I did not know women's wrestling was illegal in most of America till, like, the 70s or 80s did it finally get legalized. Like, that seems like that's such a stupid thing to... It feels almost like back in the Elizabethan era, you know, not allowing women on stage. You know, like that seems like such a stupid thing to fucking, like, come down hard on. Especially in this country. You know, sometimes you wonder, and it's good to know that the stupidity of this country is not necessarily a new invention, because, you know, even back then, you know, we had, you know, social issues and wars and race issues, but don't worry, folks, we've taken care of the most important issue. We're not having two women wrestle, so you can rest assured we took care of the big one. But yeah, just all the things that she had to do to get her cut. Like, she was trained by Billy Wolf, a wrestler, who then became a promoter, married him, and we find out that marriage was just more of a legal thing so that she could get money she was owed and she could be a legitimate partner. And then upon divorcing him, he basically blackballed her. You know, this person who made him a fortune, and he pushed her out, and she had to literally scrap and claw to get back in and get what she was owed. It's a really uplifting story. You know, it is an uplifting story. I love stories about people who just do not stay down. You know, and I love that the story is told in such a way that you show that it's not just a couple montages and everything's good again. It's like, no, we see that this was a long, hard battle for her, but she never stopped. You know, she never gave up, and she had doubts and she had down moments, but then she just turned around and went, all right, fuck you, it kind of reminds me of this thing I saw advertising Captain Marvel a few years back, where it said, you know, Steve Rogers gets knocked down, but he gets back up because it's the right thing to do. Carol Danvers gets knocked down, but she gets back up because fuck you. And that is definitely the feeling you get. I can't speak, obviously, for a female audience, but I would very much be interested to know, for any women who have seen this movie, what do you think? I feel like this would be a very empowering film. I really do. But again, I can't speak for another gender. So please, you know, let me know. What did you think? Do you feel that this movie was a good, I don't know, you know, was it a role model story? Was it an uplifting story for you? I would very legitimately like to know that. I feel like it did a really great job. The other thing I really enjoyed about this, especially, again, as a wrestling fan, is this is not just her life story, but because she was getting started as wrestling was kind of evolving, and she was around for so much of the early days of wrestling, it's like a history lesson of how wrestling went from, you know, carnivals and kind of sideshow attractions to basically the genesis of what it is now. You know, and you see a lot of it. You see a lot of the the blooming of more the showmanship of people being assigned characters. One of the supporting characters in here is one of the very first wrestling superstars. I think you can honestly call them one of the ones who kind of pioneered the term sports entertainment, Gorgeous George, who's one of the first wrestlers to have a character that they played outside of just I'm a badass, or I'm a good guy or a bad guy. I think that's the other thing. And I mentioned this about the Iron Claw. I think the Iron Claw had one of the best explanations for non-wrestling fans about why titles are important and why championships are important if it's all scripted. I think this is another great film for non-wrestling fans or who don't know a lot about it, and they kind of get a crash course not just in why people are passionate about it, why they love it. They get an education about the art of it as the wrestlers themselves learn about how to control an audience, how to control emotion, what story is going to bring in the audience, and also about a lot of the terms that are used, like I just used, like kayfabe, heel, face, shoot, work. This gives you like a really well done crash course in Wrestling 101 of all the stuff you need to know. So this is like a lot of wrestling history in one place. And again, as a longtime wrestling fan, I won't even call myself a wrestling historian. I know a lot of wrestling history, but even for someone like me, this was an incredibly educational movie and something I loved learning about. So the story itself, the movie itself, is very solid, really well done, and just grabs your attention. Does a great job. If you are a wrestling fan, there's a lot of stuff in there that you will recognize and know, and you'll learn. If you're a non-wrestling fan, you're going to get an education, which is a good thing. So the story structure, everything is really, really well done. Here's an example of how well done this is. Wrestling style is very, 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 very different now than it was back in the early days. You watch a wrestling match now, I don't care which company you favor, you watch a wrestling show now, and you're seeing a very, very highly choreographed, fast-paced, exciting, big moves, innovative stuff, lots of gimmicks. There's a lot going on in a wrestling match now. Back in the day, it was much, much simpler. It was much, much more physical. Because, and they even say this, back in the day, and wrestlers today even have to do it, wrestlers had to be good fighters, because if someone decided they weren't going to follow the story, or someone decided they're going to try to pull a fast one, a screw job, I guess would be the modern terminology, you had to be ready to defend yourself and say, no, we're not doing that. So a lot of these wrestlers were legitimate tough guys and girls, and we see that in Mildred and her fellow wrestlers. So in other words, the matches that you see recreated are not as showy and flashy as they are today. There's basic moves, and it's a lot less polished, it's a lot less crisp, it's a lot less showy. I guess that'd be a good word. And some modern wrestling fans, if you go back and watch some of these older matches, you're going to be like, that's kind of dull, But they find a way through the directing and the emotion that they bring into it, much like you would in a real wrestling match. You are invested in it no matter what, and they shoot it in such a way, these very kind of basic matches by today's standards, not by then, but by today's standards. And they still look as exciting and thrilling as anything you'd see on WWE, AEW, TNA or any of the other companies these days. So that's a sign of how well this movie is directed. So I've gone off on all this, but let's talk about the real bread and butter of this movie, and one of the things that I think really does a great job, the cast. This is a phenomenal cast. It is loaded. Like, okay, what I normally have to do, a little behind the scenes thing here, for movies, if there's actors I don't recognize or names I want to make sure I bring up, I usually write them on little Post-it notes and slap them to my dashboard here so I can just kind of glance down at them real quick, just so I can remember, people's names. All right, especially, like I say, if it's not someone I immediately recognize. There's usually maybe one Post-it note that I have 3 right here. I have 3 frickin' notepad, like Post-it note things here, just to remind myself of everybody in this cast, because it is stacked. It is really stacked. Josh Lucas, who I remember last from Sweet Home Alabama, is, Bobby Wolf. Walton Googans, who literally just hosted Saturday Night Live, is one of the first promoters. I can't remember his name. Sensei Kreese. Martin Gabe is in this as one of the early promoters. Awesome. Adam Demos is Gorgeous George. He did a really great job in this. But this is the ladies' film, and it is all headlined by Emily Bett Richards, who plays Mildred. So this is another reason I was very excited to see this film, because, of course, I knew Emily from Arrow, playing Felicity Smoke, who's one of the most endearing characters on that show. And I always enjoyed her. She just has a great energy, and I was just like, oh, wow, oh, fuck, she's in this? Awesome! And she earns that name above the title. She really does. She's putting in the heavy lifting, and it's a career performance. I'm not going to say it's as phenomenal or as world-shaking as, say, Michael B. Jordan's stuff in Sinners. But it is definitely a role and a performance and a level of dedication to a role that this is her reel from now on. This is saying, this is who I am, this is what I can do. And it's a hell of a performance. And she has a lot she has to deal with. She's got the weight of the world on her shoulders. And she more than does it. She more than rises to the occasion. She is a hell of a presence in this film. I also got to salute her for like the shape she got into. I remember thinking that when Zac Efron did Iron Claw, he's always been a pretty ripped guy, but he had to get even bigger in that, and she bulked up. Like, looking at her biceps, and you're like, holy fuck, girl. But she kicks ass. I cannot praise her performance enough in this. But she is surrounded by an excellent core of women playing, some of the great names in wrestling history. Francesca Estamond plays Mae Young. She did a phenomenal job, and I saw a comment on something, and I agree with this. I actually think Mae Young deserves a biopic, because she had an incredibly interesting life and a very long career prior to her passing. She was still taking bumps and shit in the 90s when she was, I think she was in her 70s or 80s by that point. And the Dudley Boys were putting her through tables. It's like, fuck, girl. She was tough as nails. I cannot pronounce this young lady's name. I am so sorry. I'm going to try. Marie Avendopoulos. I am so sorry. I botched her name. I know I botched her name. But plays Elvira Snodgrass. This is fun. This is fun. Let's play the 6 degrees of separation game here, because I'm going to have fun with this. So Deborah Ann Woll plays one of the other women wrestlers. So if you know that name, it's because she played Karen Page on the Netflix Daredevil series, and then had a brief cameo in Daredevil Born Again. So you have a movie that stars Green Arrow's girlfriend and Daredevil's girlfriend. You want more 6 degrees of separation? Let's do this. Playing the young rival to Mildred is Kelly Berglund. Kelly Berglund is a young lady and one of the breakout stars of the wrestling-themed show I talked about earlier, Heels. She's great in that. And when she first showed up in this film, I was like, is that her? Like, she has a very clear face. Like, she's got very wide eyes. Her facial features are very easy to identify. And it would make sense that they got her for this movie, because she's already done wrestling training and whatnot for the 2 seasons she was on Heels. So, okay, great. Do you know who Heels stars? Stephen Amell, who played Green Arrow in Arrow. So, Stephen Amell and Emily Bett Rickards, so Green Arrow and Felicity Smoke, are now both in movies or TV shows about wrestlers. And Stephen Amell actually has wrestled. He actually has. He used to hang with the Bullet Club with Cody Rhodes and the Young Bucks. So like he's kind of legit. I saw an interview and they're asking Emily, like, who do you think would fight, or who do you think would win in a wrestling match, you or Stephen Amell? I gotta be honest, from this movie, I gotta go with her. Yeah. No offense to Stephen Amell, but I think she can whoop him. I really do. But one of the other great things about this movie, especially from because again, like I said, making movies about wrestling is very difficult for the reasons I've already laid out. But this movie has a ton of legitimacy behind it because of some of the names that are involved. So, for instance, Jim Cornette, who is a wrestling personality, a manager, a booker, matchmaker, he's done literally everything in wrestling that there is to do, plays the NWA commissioner. I personally am not a fan of Jim Cornette as a person, but I will acknowledge that when it comes to a wrestling historian, there are a few people better. A few people who have been there and have as much knowledge as he does. So if he's in this, then there's a lot of what happens is going to be legitimate, because he's very passionate about that, despite whatever I might think of him as an actual person. Moreover, this movie has a laundry list of outstanding modern-day women wrestlers playing some of the other wrestlers. You've got Trinity Fatu. You've got Britt Baker. Kelly Farmer, whose ring name is Camille Brickhouse, and she's been in NWA and AEW. She plays June Byers, who is kind of our Victor Drago. She's our final boss for the film, and so she adds legitimacy. The other one, who doesn't get as much screen time and doesn't really get to say a lot, but her presence just adds so much fucking legitimacy, Toni Storm, current AEW Women's World Champion Toni Storm, timeless Toni Storm, as Clara Mortensen. And again, she doesn't have a lot of lines, but you can tell the way she walks out and the way she stands there and the way she smiles. she is a wrestler's wrestler, and she knows how to control a crowd, and she knows how to get the most out of not a lot. So having these actual women's wrestlers, these people who know their shit, and are some of the best going right now in some cases, it just piles so much fucking legitimacy onto this, of how many people have kind of thrown their weight behind it and said, no, this is a really good movie. So, but here's the thing. I always like to say that no movie is flawless. And while there is so much I did like about this movie, there's also some things that I kind of were a little groan-inducing. You know, some things that I felt weakened it a bit. So first of all, especially in the early goings, I was very concerned about this movie in the opening, maybe 15, 20 minutes or such, because I felt like I was worried that it was just going to be a tidal wave of cliche writing. Because a lot of what they do in the early goings is just very, very pat, very, very tired and overused cliches and dialogue. Mama, I don't want to be here my whole life. You know, something you've heard in literally every country girl makes it big film. You know, again, I liked the female empowerment angle, but it was a bit groan-inducing when you do get them basically speaking in bumper sticker slogans. You know, we're going to change the world. We're going to break out of this box. Using words that I don't think phrases that people really use in real life. You know, or if they do, we've heard it so much, it sounds cliche. And I was very worried in the early goings that this was going to get very cliche very fast. And luckily, it used the cliches to kind of get us into everything, and then once we were in, it kind of took off and things got better. But every now and then, those cliches do filter back in. One of the other things that's groan-inducing is, again, you can tell that this is a movie made by wrestling fans, which is good, but they sneak in Easter eggs and things that just kind of make you go, wait, what? For instance, when setting up the final match between Burke and June, Bobby Wolf cuts basically a promo and says what is now one of the most famous lines in wrestling.
Hard work pays off. Dreams come true. Bad times don't last, but bad guys do.
Which people in the know that was part of the late Scott Hall's Hall of Fame induction speech. And I actually went and tried to research it. Did he take this from that? And from what I understand, this just kind of, that's something they put in there, and it just kind of makes you go, wait, what? Likewise, this is something I hate about a lot of biopics, or a lot of historical fiction, or historical films. I hate when they do winking foreshadowing. So, for instance, in Titanic, when, what's his name? Billy Zane is sitting there and he's like, something Picasso? Oh, he'll never amount to anything. Or I was recently reading a historical fiction on the Titanic, and like literally every word out of everybody's mouth is, this boat can't sink, can it? Why can't this boat sink? Oh, well, I don't think this boat can sink. It's like, I don't believe that everyone on the Titanic was talking about how the boat was going to sink and then, oh shit, you know. There's a bit in this where Mildred goes to the NWA, that's the National Wrestling Alliance, goes to one of their board meetings to try to get her clout back after her divorce from Bobby Wolf, and the guys are telling her, well, we don't want the backstage story to become the story. That's all anybody's talking about. And of course, the guy playing Vince McMahon Sr. is like, well, my little boy Vince Jr. was saying he likes it when the promoter puts himself in the storyline. And as anybody who watches wrestling knows, Vince McMahon and all of the McMahons and a lot of producers or bookers, Vince Russo, Eric Bischoff, there's a big thing in the 90s that Paul Heyman even, that the bookers put themselves in the storyline. So again, it's one of those history, and it's just it feels cliche. It feels tacked on. And it's a moment that I know it's kind of in there to be an Easter egg for wrestling fans. But I feel like those Easter eggs were not handled well. I feel like they were too much of less of a subtle wink to the audience and more of a, you get it? You get it? The last thing I want to say before we kind of close out this is one of the things I have to say that I was very impressed by is the writing of our main antagonist, Bobby Wolf. The writing and the portrayal of him. Because this was a douchebag. All right, let's not beat around the bush. He was a douche. He was, he beat her. He cheated her. He cheated on her. But he cheated her. He tried to blackball her. So this is a douchebag. And, he's a fucking asshole. But here's the thing. I like that this movie portrayed him as a person. Meaning that this was not a villain. Again, I'll use the Billy Zane comparison from Titanic. This was not a guy who's coming at her, twisting his mustache, and, does everything but tie poor Millie Burke to the railroad tracks. This is a person, meaning that he had good attributes and negative attributes. That even as a bad person and someone who did shitty, awful things, he still had good parts to his personality. He was a big voice in the advancement of women's wrestling. And really, a lot of the stuff that he did, I'm not going to say it's right, because it sure as shit wasn't, but the things he did, like screwing over his wrestlers or making them fight hurt, every fucking promoter did that. Every fucking promoter still does that. I think without, he was no bigger shithead than any of the rest of them, which they were pretty big shitheads. So that's not really a saving grace. What I'm saying is, it would have been very easy to go the other way and just make him a completely unlikable and horrible person. But the problem, if you do that, is you don't understand why Mildred Burke stayed with him and went with him for as long as she did. If he was just this cackling villain, I don't think she was so stupid or so without options that she would have just let him be. But that again speaks to how good the writing is in this. All of these characters are incredibly well-rounded. They are very three-dimensional. Even the characters who don't get as much screen time, you still feel like they're real people. And I think that's very, very important in a film about pro wrestling, about the history of pro wrestling, because if you portray these people, all of them, as caricatures, that goes against the point. Part of the point of a movie like this is to show who these people are in real life, and show what remarkable or what horrible or what conflicted or compromised people they really were. If you're just playing them as straight heels and faces, then that's not doing them a service. So I appreciate that they did that with all the characters, including our main antagonist. So that shows dedication and not just trying to be lazy storytelling. Okay, so that's a lot. That's a lot to lay down here. So let's get to the real chase of it. Final grade for Queen of the Ring, it is an A. It is a solid A, and I am very happy I finally got to watch this movie. It was worth the wait. And I want this movie to have a bigger audience than it does. These limited releases and whatnot. It's available right now. Go watch it. Please watch it. It deserves a lot of eyes on it. It's an important film in my opinion. So yeah, go check it out, please. All right, so there you have it. Thank you so much for coming along. Thanks for listening to me. Thanks for tuning in to these podcasts or these video essays, wherever you're getting these. Thank you so much. We will see you next time, and as always, drive safe, and I will see you at the movies.